And then he says, also, at the same time, the neurochemical happening is sometimes present when love is absent.
Oh, that's it. It's done. It's done.
إني ألقى الإناس في صومي وصلاتي ودعائي للرحمن وجميع الطاعات.
Sisters, welcome to the Mohammed Hijab show. I'm taking over. We are talking about the genealogy of Jad ibn Dirham. So you got an ijaz on this issue. So please talk to us about the genealogy of Jad ibn Dirham.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Jad ibn Dirham. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to another very important show with someone who's actually come back on the show by popular demand. Hamza Zulzis. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
After we've done the previous show with Hamza, obviously a lot of people were actually saying, messaging me privately and saying that they want to see more of Hamza and they want to see more of this kind of, let's say, academic discussion. Also going into the nitty-gritty of things and discussing things from more, let's say, an academic perspective to try and bridge the gap between the academic world and, let's say, the popular discourse.
Yes.
And what we're going to talk about today, if you don't mind me saying, you've done a good job in kind of highlighting. You've done a whole chapter on this in your book, isn't there? Consciousness.
Yes, I mean, my reading has slightly changed in my studies as
Yeah.
a result of completing the postgrad. But yeah, it's roughly the same.
So this is the thing, I mean, guys, what's your book, just for people that don't know what we're going to talk about? Is it
The
called
Divine Reality.
Divine Reality, and it's available on
Various channels.
various channels. So
Like Amazon.
I'm going to put this on the description, guys, so you can check this book. There is a chapter that is actually kind of dedicated to this idea today of consciousness, which we're going to talk about. But the idea is this. I mean, first and foremost, I personally believe in the Dawah. This is not something which has been spoken about too much.
Consciousness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is the
Are you trying to say that people give dawah unconsciously? I'm kidding.
No, what I mean to say is that
It's supposed to be a joke.
I
yeah?
do.
Yeah, yeah.
What we mean here is that really this is where I believe, like, people who have been educated, let's say from a Western perspective, can provide what I would call the cutting edge in the Dawah discourse, because it is a cutting edge. I haven't seen for a long time. I've done obviously some readings in this. I haven't seen Muslim academics or Muslim speakers, Muslim da'is use these kinds of arguments, frankly. I think this is kind of cutting edge.
Sure.
Not that it's cutting edge or groundbreaking from the philosophical perspective. These discussions are always had in the philosophical circle. But from a da'wi perspective, al-khitab al-dini, if you will, the discourse, the religious discourse, it's not something which we have been exposed to. So consciousness, first and foremost, can you define consciousness? What is consciousness? Why is it important?
Okay. Consciousness is important because it makes us human from the
Right.
point of view.
Okay.
So consciousness relates to some really easy things like our ability to have to think and to have rational insights and to be aware, and the fact that we have, cognitive processes going on, that we can think about things. Yeah, those are the kind of easy aspects of consciousness. There is another aspect of consciousness which is very difficult. It's actually been called the hard problem of consciousness.
Mm.
What is the hard problem?
Mm.
The hard problem of consciousness is really based upon two things. Number one, what is it like for a human being to have an inner subjective conscious experience? And number two, why do they have that inner subjective conscious experience arising from physical processes?
Yeah.
For example, what's your favorite sweet?
That's a very difficult question.
Oh, you like strawberries?
I like strawberry. No, actually, I'm allergic to strawberry.
You're allergic to strawberries?
Yeah, but I do like them. I still have them sometimes.
Okay, so give me another fruit you like.
I like, do you know I like banana?
Okay, banana.
Yeah.
So you're having a banana. So you're having a banana right in front of me, right?
Okay.
You are now having an inner subjective conscious experience of what it is like for you to have a banana,
Right.
right? So that's
Yeah.
inner subjective conscious states, also known as phenomenal state, a phenomenal state, right? So you have this phenomenal experience, this inner subjective conscious experience of eating a banana. And that inner subjective conscious experience arises from neurobiological processes, arises from physical stuff. So the question is, and the problem of the hard problem is, essentially, what is it like for Mohammed Hijab to have a banana? Right? What is it like for you? What is that inner subjective conscious experience for you? And why do you have that inner subjective conscious experience arising from physical processes? These two questions make up what is well known in philosophy now as the hard problem of consciousness. You know, you look into the works of Manzotti, Moderato, Nagel, Chalmers, Alter, many others.
Right. An interesting book that I think you recommended to me some time ago was by Raymond Tallis. Which is called Aping Mankind.
Aping Mankind.
And he also made a book called Why We're Not Computers or something of that nature. I guess the second question I want to ask you is this. I mean, let me give you a scenario. Hamza Zortzis. Let's say I pretend I'll make a robot. I get a robot that's 5'10", you know.
10.5.
5'10.5", okay. With the 18-inch biceps, of course.
No.
You know, and the charm exact robot, and in fact we program it. We'll give it algorithms, so that the robot acts in exactly the same way as you act.
Yes.
So, in all intents and purposes, this robot is actually Hamza Zortzis, in terms of aesthetics, how it looks, how it acts. If I go ahead and put a knife through this robot or break the robot using a bat or whatever it is, have I killed Hamza Zortzis 2.0, or have I damaged property?
You've damaged property. And probably the main reason you've damaged property is because I am not that robot. And even if you were to try and claim that the physical makeup of that robot was somehow identical to my physical makeup, you still haven't killed a human being, you've just killed a robot. Because the inner structure of that robot, if you want to use such a language, does not produce inner subjective conscious experience. There isn't a what is it like for the robot, you know, to wake up on a Sunday morning and enjoy a gourmet coffee.
Right, so you're saying that if we just depend upon materialistic definitions.
Well, I would even argue that's not the best example to use, but I know what you're trying to go here.
Yeah.
And what I would say here in the case of the robot is the robot essentially is based on algorithms, and as William Hasker said, that a robot as a computational thing is basically just an extension of human rationality and consciousness, right? It doesn't have it; it's an extension of human rationality.
Because it needs an input.
It needs an input, absolutely. Not just that. One would also argue, if you follow Professor Sell and others, that the robot itself, all it can do is just manipulate symbols.
Right.
Syntax.
Right.
It can't. Sorry, it could just manipulate symbols. Right. It can't manipulate meaning, syntax. So there's a difference between symbols and syntax. Right. It could manipulate essentially zeros and ones, which is the base of all
binary code.
Your binary code, and you have more complexity after that. But it could just manipulate that, but it cannot attach meaning onto those symbols. Because you could even train a computer to believe yes is no and no is yes from that point of view. Yeah. So one would argue
that's
that,
a good point. Can you just repeat that point again?
Well, you could train a computer, or you could input into a computer that yes means no and no means yes.
Right.
But you could do that with a human being too. One would argue.
Yeah.
But the point I'm trying to make here is
no meaning.
That they cannot attach meaning to the symbols. It's just a manipulation of symbols, right?
And it wouldn't be a valid inference to suggest that potentially this robot has the same first-person subjective experience as you do, that has consciousness.
Of course you can, because look, maybe this is not a great example to use. Let's use the example of maybe even a zombie. Yeah, because a zombie is biological, right? A zombie is like soulless, isn't it? It's supposed to kill things, right? Say we had a zombie version of you, right? Does that zombie version of you have feelings? Right? Zombies are supposed to be these things that don't feel, they just attack and eat and kill, right? They have no inner subjective conscious states. They're just like almost this in between this realm of consciousness and unconsciousness. They're like ghost-like, but they're you. They got your biological makeup. They have an intact brain, a heart, the physicality's there. So from a zombie point of view, does that zombie have inner subjective conscious experiences?
No.
Well, probably not, right? So what we would say is why are we saying this? Because there is something fundamentally different about inner subjective conscious states and just physical stuff.
Yeah.
There is something fundamentally different. This is not about an epistemic gap. It's not about a knowledge gap that, we just don't know. You know, we don't know how the physical stuff works in order for us to have inner subjective conscious states.
Right.
It's not just about knowledge. Yes, there is an epistemic gap that we don't know. We could discuss that later. But fundamentally, what's more crucial here is there is something ontologically different. What does that mean? That the nature and source of these two things are different.
Okay.
Let me break it down, bro.
Please do.
You have a brain. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Yeah. You have a brain. So we take your brain, and there are neurochemical pathways. As a neuroscientist, for example, I'm looking at these neurochemical pathways and I'm correlating them because neuroscience is basically...
That's what Talis did, didn't he? He was a neurologist or something like that, wasn't he? MRI guy.
He knew, if I'm correct, he knew the neuroscience, and he's also a philosopher.
Yeah.
And he's an atheist, by the way.
Yeah.
But he doesn't believe in this physicalist understanding of human being. Yeah. He finds it quite disheartening, actually.
Yeah, he does, yeah.
So from that point of view, say you have a brain, and we map out all the neurochemical pathways in your brain, and we correlate it, because neuroscience is the science of correlations mainly, and we correlate the neurochemical pathways to, for example, eating a banana on a Sunday morning, watching the sunrise or something, and you have an inner subjective conscious state, and you describe that state as wonderful, spiritual, mystical, tasty, sweet, nice,
Right.
You got all those descriptions, and what they say is, that neurochemical stuff that's happening, those neurochemical happenings is his subjective conscious state. They are making it identical to his subjective conscious state. Now what neuroscience does, and you may hear lots of things in the popular media, online world, that they found this new kind of neurochemical pathway or happenings, and they're correlating it to this inner subjective conscious state. They're saying that neurochemical happening is identical to the subjective experience. That is a big problem,
right?
Because neuroscience hasn't proven that. What they've done, they're just bringing the assumption into play.
Right.
All they're saying is they're saying it's identical, but that term itself, that statement, it is identical to. They would have to prove it, because that's exposing a philosophical assumption.
Right.
Because neuroscience, people think neuroscience is philosophically free. There is no philosophy-free science, just like Dan Dennett said. There's no philosophy-free science. You're always going to have certain assumptions if you study the philosophy of science, right? Which you have to use and adopt in order to have your science.
Right.
So in the case of neuroscience, a key assumption of neuroscience is physicalism.
Which is?
Physicalism is the philosophical approach to the mind or to consciousness that basically says that inner subjective conscious experience can be reduced in some way to physical stuff.
Okay.
That is a philosophical assumption.
Materialism.
In other words, they use materialism as well. In the literature, physicalism and materialism are used they're interchangeable, but they do have historical meanings that are slightly different. Materialism used to mean that you could reduce things to physical stuff. Physicalism means that it doesn't necessarily have to be reduced to physical stuff, but it could be reduced to physical processes. But that's neither here or there. They're using it interchangeably now, So physicalism, what they're saying now, physicalism is a philosophical approach to consciousness that is basically saying that who you are, your conscious states, especially your phenomenal states, your inner subjective conscious states, can be reduced to physical stuff or processes.
Let me see if I get this right.
And that's why neuroscience, you have to bring this to the audience, because people miss that. Say, oh look, there's this new study that comes along, they found 40 megahertz in the brain or something, there's some kind of frequency and some kind of happenings, and they correlated to you having a coffee, therefore they found the basis of consciousness. Hold on a second, my friend. Let's turn down the kind of, neuromania, as Talis says. This is neuromania. Let's turn the knob down a bit. All they've shown is a correlation. They haven't shown that the 40 megahertz, for example, is identical to that subjective experience. To make that claim, you now have to expose your philosophical assumption that physical stuff is identical to inner subjective conscious states, and that is the problem.
Let me see if I get this right, and you correct me if I'm wrong, okay? Is what you're saying as follows. Say, for example, I get someone, I'm not sure if this is even possible, but let's say I get someone, right? Put them under an MRI scanner. Get them to eat, or speak to them, I'll say to them, I'll give them keywords which will trigger certain emotions. For example, saying something which has emotive resonance to them, right? And the scientist in the MRI room, he says, okay, well here, when you say this word, these areas in the brain these neurological pathways are triggered, or this part of the brain is triggered. We can see that this part of the brain is triggered. Now, obviously, from a scientific perspective, we don't have a problem with that.
No, not at all.
No issue. Now, the issue you're saying you have and we have is that actually you can't say just because that part of the brain is, let's say, now aroused, or it's now
there's neurochemical firing.
There's neurochemical firing. You can't say that is
the basis for subjective conscious state.
Your let's say, for example, love. You can't say love is reduced to a chemical bundle.
No, that's extremely reductionist because there's other parts of the brain that are firing as well.
Yeah.
And in different studies, there are so many contradictions in neuroscience. Yeah.
Right.
But the interesting thing here is this: say you prove that that is the basis of love.
Yeah.
Does that now mean that is love? Do you see my point?
Right.
No, it doesn't mean it is love.
Right.
It could just be a physical manifestation, it could be part of the process, it could be something that allows love to happen, but it doesn't mean it is love. It doesn't mean it is the experience of love.
Yeah, it's not the experience.
That's the first point.
Yeah.
The second point is, even if you were to claim that it is love, you still haven't solved the hard problem, because I would ask you, right, what is it for that person to fall in love? What is it like for them? And maybe give you more descriptions. Then you just ask those descriptions, what is it like for those people to have those descriptions? Words are vehicles to meaning. Meaning is a representation of subjectivity. You could still never find out what it's like for Mohammed Hijab to fall in love. Right? And that's the point here, and that's something very important. But something that's very interesting about the method of neuroscience, which is very interesting. David Papineau gave a brilliant argument. And his...
I think you've mentioned about 50 people now.
Yeah, sorry, but I'm going to pick up my notes. Let me just pick up my notes here,
right.
Because this is chapter 2 of a forthcoming book that me and Sabur Ahmed are writing called The Failed Hypothesis.
Wait a
right?
minute, there's a new book coming out.
Yeah, it is, yeah. So that's why I've done a lot of studies on this. This was based on my postgrad thesis as well.
Okay.
So basically, the David Papineau argument is really, really clever. So let me just give it to you. I do apologize, I'm going through these papers.
No, it's
I
good.
look like a little mad philosopher here, but I do apologize.
You do philosophy, you're going to be refuted, my friend.
Philosophy is fine, man. Everyone does philosophy. If I'm going to be refuted, then my answer is this: there is no such thing as a philosophy-free refutation. Oh! You know when they do that on the, you know, they go, oh, right? Yeah, I'm coming out like a child now, but that's not something they do. That's what they do at school, isn't it? So one of the limitations of neuroscience is this, and it's very, very interesting for everyone to actually understand this and transcend the kind of online hype that happens sometimes.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So there's a variety of material candidates. Let me just read it to you, Mama, easier. So David Papineau, he postulates that neuroscience will not be able to target the material basis for conscious experience because when neuroscientists attempt to correlate neurochemical events in the brain with phenomenal experience, inner subjective experience, there would always be a number of different material properties.
Say that part again, sorry.
So, every time a neuroscience was to correlate neurochemical events, happenings in the brain.
So this goes back to our MRI example.
Yes, so say you see the MRI or whatever you see, and you see neurochemical happenings in the brain, and they want to correlate that with the subjective experience, the actual feeling, or the whatever is being reported. There would always be a number of different material properties which fit the evidence equally well.
Okay.
So he admits that neuroscientific research is able to narrow down, so neuroscience is really good and clever, we love it as well as Muslims, is able to narrow down the physical brain events that correspond to conscious experience, correlate, not cause, but there would always be a variety of material candidates. And this is what he says. When we look for some material property common to all those cases where humans report they are phenomenally conscious, meaning subjective experience, and absence whenever they deny this, we will inevitably find a variety of material candidates which fit perfectly with the database. Apart from any strictly physical property, there would also be various structural properties. Now this is very, very, very interesting. What Papineau basically says here is that, well, you don't have a strong argument. You can't now say that the neurochemical event is identical with the conscious experience. Okay? So here's the argument that he presents. And try and follow. It's a bit detailed logically, but I think you'll get it, yeah? Number one. A neurochemical event E is identical with a conscious experience P. E cannot be absent when P is testified to be present.
So again.
Let me read it once and then we break it down.
Okay.
Yeah? So, number one. A neurochemical event E is identical with a conscious experience P.
Okay.
Number two. E cannot be absent when P is testified to be present. Number three. E cannot be present when P is testified to be absent. Number four. E must be present to be necessary for P. Number five. E is sometimes absent when P is testified to be present. Number six. E is sometimes present when P is testified to be absent. Number seven. Therefore, E is not necessary for P. So it's a very brilliant argument.
I think I see where this is.
Yes.
Right.
So let's break it down in very layman English as soon as possible.
Yes.
So Papino says this. So you have a neurochemical subjective experience going on, right? Say it's correlated to a subjective experience. So you have a neurochemical event happening.
We see something firings.
Yeah. And what neuroscience says, or some people that adopt a wrong approach to neuroscience, they say this neurochemical firing is identical with the conscious experience.
Yes, okay.
That's the main assumption
Yes.
here. But he's saying when you look at the massive database on all of these scans and neurochemical findings and happenings in the database,
There's more than one candidate.
there's lots of more than one candidate. They can narrow down, but there's still more than one candidate, right?
Yeah. That's the first issue.
So yeah. So what he's saying here now is the neurochemical event. Oh, I do apologize. My iPhone conscious experience of a computer. It's talking by itself now.
Okay.
See, Siri on the iPhone watch is trying to prove internal conscious experience. Anyway, so a neurochemical event is identical to conscious experience. So what's happening in the brain? The assumption is identical to the internal conscious experience. But then he breaks it down. Okay, so this would mean that the neurochemical event cannot be absent when someone is talking about the subjective conscious experience.
Yeah.
Because if it's the same, it can't be absent.
Right, so he's...
Yes.
Well, hold on. So he's saying that if this thing is this thing...
They have to be both present.
If the neurological firings represent the subjective experience, if the subjective experience is present where the neurological firing is not happening, then that would represent a contradiction.
Yes. So basically what he's saying is you got the neurochemical event happening.
Yeah.
It can't be absent when you're saying that neurochemical event is responsible for a certain
the
subjective conscious experience.
Yes.
So he said that they both have to be present, basically. Yeah.
Yes.
So therefore, the neurochemical firings, right, have to be present to be necessary for the conscious experience.
Yeah, of course.
Because if it's causal,
Yes,
if you think this neurochemical finding is the conscious event, the conscious experience, then it has
one
to.
can't do without the other.
Yes, so it has to be necessary.
Yeah,
it has to be present necessarily. But
basically, you can't say that love is caused by this part of the brain, unless it's always there when love is there.
Absolutely, and
Yeah.
yes, good, and also absolutely.
Yeah.
In a nutshell. So therefore, what he's seen in the database of neurobiological studies, he says, however, that thing that you're saying is causing love, that neurochemical pathway and those neurochemical happenings, they're sometimes absent when love is present, when P is present.
That's really good.
Yes. And then he says, also, at the same time, the neurochemical happening is sometimes present when love is absent.
That's it. It's done. It's done.
Exactly.
It's finished.
So therefore, he concludes. It's a brilliant argument, and I tell you the journal that it's from is called David Papineau. Could there be a science of consciousness? Philosophical Issues, Volume 13, 2003, pages 208 to 209.
Do you know how powerful this is?
Of course, it is powerful. That's why I put it in my thesis.
Let me put this in layman's terms and tell me, correct me if I'm wrong.
But let me just do the conclusion, bro.
Yeah,
it says, therefore, the neurochemical firings is not necessary for that particular inner subjective conscious state.
Do you know what you're saying? Let me tell you what you're saying. You correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
You're saying...
David Papineau is saying.
Right, but generally you're making the argument using his reference. What we're saying, what you're saying more specifically, is love, hate, all the subjective experiences, compassion, going through even eating, like you said, a banana.
Even pain, pleasures and
pain
tastes.
And pleasure.
Yeah.
All of that cannot be explained using neuroscience.
No, let's just calm down with the language. It can be explained, but...
It doesn't... Okay, let me say that again. So you're saying that all of those things cannot be said to be caused by neuroscience.
Yeah, well, okay. Yes, so I know what you're trying to say here. Right. Basically, what we're saying is that neuroscience cannot solve the hard problem of consciousness. It cannot tell us what is it like for Mohammed to have a banana on a Sunday morning.
Yes.
And it cannot say why that why that subjective experience comes from or arises from neurobiological happenings or physical processes. Wow. That's the hard problem of consciousness.
That's powerful.
Now, you can never, this is my view, you can never even claim neuroscience can answer the question.
Why?
The reason being is because the only thing that neuroscience can do, let's look at it as a method, it's a beautiful method, is basically say that physical happening is identical to that conscious experience.
Yes.
But you need to prove that. All you've seen is a neurochemical happening and a conscious experience. To say that they are identical now, given the fact that they look so different, feel so different, can be spoken about in different ways.
One is first person, one is third person.
Exactly.
Right.
In that way, you now need to prove that assumption you've made, because it's not as a result of the data, it's your interpretation of the data, because you have that philosophical assumption baggage that you're imposing on the data, which is they are identical. But frankly, they are not identical. And that kind of assumption is actually a philosophical assumption. That's why neuroscience is not philosophically free. And I just want to really just iron this out, that I'm not just making this up.
Can I just say one thing, and you correct me?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. I wanted to ask, now, put it this way, right? If science can only deal with falsifying material things.
Yeah.
So science cannot, because it has naturalistic presuppositions.
Yes.
So since science can only falsify that which is naturalistic, it cannot falsify that which is metaphysical. And therefore, to discount that which is metaphysical, whilst using only a naturalistic framework, is not possible.
Look, there's no such thing as a metaphysics-free science anyway. Especially in your interpretations, because you have some assumptions that are first principles for you, and metaphysics is a wide field. Metaphysics not only talks about like things like ontology, the nature and source of things, it talks about first principles. You have first principles in science all the time. Like a first principle of science is that you have to believe and assume
but you
that
can't
there are
put
external...
metaphysical things under a microscope.
Agree, but there's a lot of scientific things you can't put under the microscope. Like when people think science is all about falsification,
it's not true.
Read Popper. If you read the analysis of Popper, people have moved away from this kind of hard Popperian stance of everything must be falsified. Here's a proof, and it's a challenge to everybody.
Go.
Go to any philosopher of science, any scientist, and say, can you revive a falsified theory? Yes, you can. You just change the assumptions. Yeah, and here's an example. Right, so they believe in orbits, right? All the great data that we saw. And then what did they start finding? They saw the perturbations, the wobbly orbit of Uranus, right? That is what they falsified the data, right? It's falsified. They're saying, oh, orbits are not, there's no orbits anymore. We have to change the way we understand celestial mechanics. They said, we're not going to do that. We've got so much good data. It's been affirmed so well. Forget this thing that has basically gone against our, theory. So what do? They just changed the assumption. They said, fine. There's another planet.
Neptune.
And that's how they found Neptune.
Yeah,
that's it. So it happens in science all the time. It's called epistemic holism, right? That there is that kind of network of different beliefs that have been affirmed, and some of them, they're all supported by each other. It's like this kind of coherentism going on in science. This very hardcore falsification, people don't use it anymore. Yes, it's useful, don't get me wrong. I read an essay on this.
It has limitations.
It has limitations, yeah. So I just want to go back on basically neuroscience's assumptions, just to really show that I'm not just making this up, right?
Okay.
And it's very important for us to understand this. So, the philosophical assumptions of neuroscience, okay? So take, for example, what, Manzotti and Moderato, they highlight that neuroscience is not metaphysically innocent, and that empirical data needs to be interpreted from the perspective of some premise, yeah? Rex Welshon, right? He also posits neuroscience explanation of consciousness is based on an assumption that phenomenal experience can be reduced to biology.
Right.
So there's an assumption there. And that's why if neuroscience claims they've solved the hard problem of consciousness, which I believe is nonsense, especially from an ontological point of view, if they do claim, all they're doing is bringing their philosophical unproven assumption to the table. Just like what Rex Wilson says, right? And he's a physicalist, right? Ian Gold and Adina Roskis, they explain that science is based on physicalist guiding assumptions which are taken from other fields, and they're up for grabs, right? You have so much. You have so many people. Like Ravoncio makes a really good point. He basically says, anti-Ravoncio, if you want a really good summary of what I've been saying in terms of the different philosophical approaches to the hard problem of consciousness, read the book called Consciousness, The Science of Subjectivity by Ravoncio. I think it was published in 2010. Really good book. And he even says that neurobiological theories or neurobiological studies about consciousness, especially subjective consciousness, they're not philosophically innocent. They're not philosophically free. They have philosophical baggage, and many of them, because of the nature of the science, they adopt what you call physicalism. Now there are different types of physicalism, by the way,
so
and it's not.
let me ask
We can't do that today, though, bro. It's too long. All we could do is summarize this.
Try and put it in a
It has to be another video, bro. It's too long.
Yeah.
Because you have things like reductive materialism or reductive physicalism, eliminative materialism. You have functionalism.
Yeah.
You have emergent materialism, strong and weak emergent materialism.
But all of them, I mean, you could summarize it. All of them have the same kind of.
They
basic
do, but I don't want to misrepresent academic discussions. There are strong discussions going on, but generally speaking, and what I've read and my postgrad studies, they're not addressing the hard problem of consciousness.
Yeah.
Some people claim it's only an epistemic gap, like there is a gap in our knowledge.
Yeah.
Yes, there is a gap in our knowledge. We don't know how the physical stuff, allows consciousness, subjective consciousness to exist, right? Or to come into reality. Yeah. We don't know that, and we don't know, and it's true, we don't know what it's like for Mohammed Hijab to have a banana on a Sunday.
Yeah.
Or, we don't know that, what it's like specifically for you. Or I would know it's for me. I might know neurochemical pathways. I might understand your language, the descriptions, but your first person inner subjective experience, I don't know. So it's true, there is an epistemic gap, a knowledge gap. But I would go further, like many others, and I believe Professor Nagel argues this as well, and many others. There is a ontological gap. It's metaphysics. It's a metaphysical question, because the two things that you're talking about, the source and nature of these things seem fundamentally so different. How can we even start to claim, right, that neurochemical firings, neurochemical firings are identical and equivalent to inner subjective conscious experience? Surely, it's the mark of a rational mind to question something that didn't have to be. And let's question this. Are you saying that it's just a knowledge gap? Here's the proof. Say you know everything about the brain. Does it now follow you know his first person experience? Because science is all about third person. Do you see my point? No matter how much I know about the brain and physical processes, I would still not know what it's like for Mohammed Hijab to have a banana on a Sunday and to understand why they arise from physical processes. That is a metaphysical question. It's about ontology, metaphysics. It's a different kettle of fish. Hopefully, I know we haven't gone into it in detail, but hopefully we could discuss this at another time. Go for reductive materialism, eliminative materialism, and all of these isms and schisms and functionalism, which are very interesting as well. And I want to go more into, hopefully, back to the computational models as well. Yeah. Can a computer be rational? Because computers do deductive logic. That's like an expression of rationality and consciousness. Does that mean computers can be conscious? And about artificial intelligence, and we've got some really good arguments about this, but that's not the time.
Hamza, I was going to say that, so this is kind of to bring it to Islamic model now, because in terms of explanatory framework, now the atheistic, naturalistic framework, we are saying that consciousness remains a hard problem. It cannot be explained. There is no physical, materialistic or physicalistic way of explaining consciousness, that all of those approaches that you've aforementioned are not really said to be useful in explaining the whole problem.
Or coherent and comprehensive enough.
So our concept of, for example, we have the concept of al-ruh. يسألونك عن الروح. They ask you about the ruh, the soul.
It's the command of your Lord, yeah.
It says from the command of our Lord. وَأُوتِيتُ مِنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. That you haven't been given of knowledge of it except for small knowledge. Yeah. So, and this is in Surah Al-Isra, I think, verse 81. And the idea, the narrative of, for example, Surah Al-Hijr, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَإِذَا سَوَيْتُهُ وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي فَقَعُوا لَهُ سَاجِدِينَ. So when I have fashioned him, i.e. Adam, and I've breathed into him of my ruh, spirit.
Yeah.
So the angels فَقَعُوا لَهُ سَاجِدِينَ fall into prostration to him. The narrative being that there is, and as I was talking to you before the video, the idea وَإِذَا النُّفُوسُ زُوِّجَتْ, like the idea that in the Day of Judgment you have the body, and then you have
and the soul. They'll be married again together. They'll be brought together again. Yeah.
Right.
So this just really, in my view, and I've written about this in the book, not my book, but the new book that's coming out, Thought Hypothesis. What we're saying is, in my view, I think an integrative dualism works, right?
The lack of like what
well, it's not Cartesian dualism, because we have a different approach. Yeah. Yes, we do believe there are two different substances.
The body and the soul are different.
Yes. So for example, the ruh is different and the body is different, right? As per the Islamic evidences.
Yes.
But they interact, right? Now that's one contention. Like for example, the philosopher of biology, Elliot Sober, he says, well, one contention of dualism is, well, we don't know how they interact. But to be honest, not knowing how they interact doesn't undermine your approach. That's a bit of a false argument, really. Yeah. So they call that the interactionist problem. But put that aside for now. So you have these two different substances. You have the ruh, the soul, in essence, or consciousness, or inner subjective conscious states, whatever you want to call it. And you have the body and the mind, and the brain, rather. They interact. this is your metaphysical thesis. This is your understanding of reality. This is the source and nature of who we are, right? But it's integrative with the science. Allow the scientists to do their job. Allow neuroscience to do its job. Allow all the scientific hypotheses to come into play and compete and discuss and try to be affirmed and falsified or whatever. And allow that to happen. There's nothing wrong with that. All we're saying is, it basically makes the science and the neuroscience metaphysically comprehensive, that they don't start jumping into other spheres of thought like philosophy, which they can't really deal with, and bring out their false assumptions that they can't even really justify. All we're saying is, we believe in a world and a universe that has consciousness, that is distinct from the material stuff. They interact in some way, right? And as human beings, we can look at the physical stuff, the neurobiological chemical happenings, to find correlations and how they interact from that point of view, and what is happening, yeah, and the physical happenings. We could, when we allow neuroscience to continue its amazing journey. But because of our metaphysical comprehensive approach here, we will not now say, even if we were to know everything about the brain, it now means we could now ignore inner subjective conscious states, or it means we've now answered the hard problem by saying they're identical, because we've said there already a problem by doing that. So it's a far more comprehensive way of saying it.
I was going to say
integrative dualism.
So here, the question that I sort of started with.
I know I just summarised that, and it's very incoherent, but there's a really good book called Dualism, A Contemporary Defense, I believe, published by Routledge. Very good book.
I was going to say, going back to what we started with, it's maybe a good way to end as well. The fact, we started with robots. I mean, maybe you don't like the idea or the example of that one, but I find it useful. Like the idea now, because we're talking about, we're in an age of artificial intelligence and giving robots rights and all these kind of things, right? And we talked about the fact that if I created a robot, Hamza 2.0, with your exact characteristics, aesthetic and like psychological characteristics and your reactions and everything, that if I break that robot, it wouldn't be murder, it would basically be damaging property, yeah? This reminds me of a verse of the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says Al-Hajj. There's a verse that says, ضُرِبَ مَثَلًا فَاسْتَمِعُوا لَهُ, that there is an example that's been struck, so listen to it. It says that you'll never be able, that your gods will never be able to, or the gods that you worship will never be able to create a dhubaba, which is a fly, وَلَوْ اجْتَمَعُوا لَهُ, even if they come together and they try and create it. And if you think about this from the, like, because we started off with robots, right?
Yes.
The idea of like material structure, which mimics aesthetically, say for example, another biological structure with what we call life and consciousness, right? Yet, you said to us that would be property damage, it wouldn't be murder if I broke it, right?
Yes.
So this idea, the Quranic challenge here, because there's many Quranic challenges, just actually one of them, we wouldn't be able to actually, you could say aesthetically, we could make a Hamza 2.0. We could make a robot that mimics Hamza 2.0, Hamza Zorsis. But we could make a robot that mimics a fly 2.0. But from this perspective that we just talked about, this metaphysical perspective, we would never be able to endow such an entity with life and consciousness. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, I would argue that you can't have a robot with inner subjective conscious states.
Yeah.
For you to claim that they can, then what you're claiming is that physical stuff is identical to inner subjective conscious states, which would be a big problem, because it can't even address the hard problem of consciousness as we just discussed. So you have to bring into light your philosophy of why you think physicalism is true from that point of view, or a type of physicalism, whether it's functionalism or emergent materialism or eliminative materialism or reductive materialism. So
whatever it is.
Yeah, whatever it is. So that's a very good challenge. Absolutely.
And with that, guys, Jazakumullah khairan, I would like to say to you that this last thing before we can kind of cut off here. There's a lot of jargon, a lot of terminology that you might not have understood, but once again, the point is we're trying to bring forward an Islamic explanation. At the end of the day, if you're a naturalist atheist watching this video, with respect to you, we're happy that you've watched it to this length. I know a lot of you do that. A lot of you are subscribed to my channel, and I want a lot more of you to subscribe because we want to share ideas. But the point is this, guys, it really is a problem when, let's say for example, your worldview, the worldview that you have, is limited in its ability to explain basic phenomena, I would say. Like, for example, first person subjective experience for me and for you is, I would describe it as almost axiomatic. Like, It's the first thing you realize about yourself, that you exist. It's the first thing that you realize about yourself, how you feel and where you are at any particular point in time. The worldview that you guys have, and once again I'm speaking to you guys with respect, the worldview that you guys have is not only just limited in explaining to us how we got here and how we're placed in the universe, but it's even limited in the fact that it doesn't explain to us who we are and how we are. Yeah, it can only do so at best from a neurological, biological perspective. I say to you guys, think outside the neurobiological box and think about the metaphysics. Think about these things. Think about consciousness. Why are you? That's the question. You want to answer it?
I just want to make something funny. Imagine the people that you dearly love, like your mother, your grandparents, your children, your loved ones, your partner, someone that you really love, and then they went through a traumatic experience. Like, God forbid this happens to you, like a death in the family or something, and they're mourning and upset and really, really sad. Like, I got so much pain and anguish and I don't know what to do and I feel really upset, and just turn around and say to them, if you want to be consistent, turn around and say to them, darling, don't worry, everything you're feeling is just neurochemicals firing. I know that sounds really bad and funny,
Right.
but can you do that?
Right.
Do you imagine, like, my kids, right, or my son or my daughter, she comes up to me, she says, Baba, I'm really upset today because, Zachariah stole my toy or took my toy away. I'm like, darling, don't worry, it's not a big deal. It's, there's neurochemical fires in your brain, that's all it is, right?
But if that person turns around and says, "But didn't you see Papa's argument?"
Back me nail.
Guys, Jazakallah khair. Make sure to subscribe. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.